The Rover 75 was the company's last throw of the dice, a ground-up, all-new development built without compromise. But despite the fact that it was well received by the press and public alike when it was unveiled in 1998, the company would ultimately close just a few short years later in 2005. We thought we'd take a drive in this diesel auto estate model to see what they're like to drive today.
But first, our friends at Lancaster Insurance are running monthly giveaways. You can win all sorts, from experience days to tools, restaurant vouchers and tech. So click the link below at the end of the video to enter their latest competition.
So, Rover. The Rover 75 will go down as the last chapter in the British car industry book entitled What Might Have Been. Come the early 90s, Rover was in the hands of British Aerospace and had been run largely on a shoestring. They were selling cars based on Honda, the Rover 200 and 400, 600 based on the Accord, and of course the 800 based on the Legend. But come 1994, BMW had purchased Rover, and the Munich car maker was owned by a staunch Anglophile, Bernd Peterschreider at that stage, and he was really keen on turning Rover into something of a traditional British marque, the perfect complement to the Teutonic sort of clinical nature of a BMW, the ultimate driving machine. And with the ageing 800 and the Rover 600 being very much subject to royalty payments to Honda for the use of their engines and the underpinnings, BMW quite sensibly said, we're only going to have the budget to replace one model. The RD1 or R40 project would have to replace both the Honda Accord based 600 and the ageing 800. 600 designer Richard Woolley went to work on the exterior, and it was a very similar retro inspired theme. It felt more accomplished though somehow. The proportions were better. They weren't compromised by the Accord underpinnings. The interior was to make use of modern materials and ergonomics while still integrating traditional touches like wood veneer and classic instrumentation. So work got underway on the R40 project, initially unhindered by BMW. Rover were just allowed to get on with it with very much a no compromise approach. Gone with the wishbone suspension all round, McPherson struts up front, and a lot of engineering work to accommodate BMW's sophisticated Z-axle rear suspension. That and a stiff shell would definitely afford the Rover 75 heeless ride and superb handling as well. The engines were going to be the 1.8 K-series 4-cylinder engine, a 2-litre version of the KV6 engine, and a 2.5 KV6 engine with 174 brake horsepower. And adding to that also the 2-litre turbocharged BMW diesel engine. So all the right ingredients then for a superb replacement to the 600 and 800. However, while Rover did definitely have the autonomy to get on with it for the first couple of years, it was clear that BMW were keen to exert their influence. The original plan was to unveil the Rover 75 at the Geneva Motor Show of 1999, but eventually there was some pressure put on Rover, albeit at the last minute, to bring that unveiling forward to the British International Motor Show in late 1998. Not only would that put pressure on getting the cars ready in time, but it would also put a yawning gap between when the car was first unveiled and when the public were first to get their cars in the spring of 99. But it did make sense if you think about it. An all-new British Saloon, a new era for Rover, introducing at the British Motor Show. Jaguar were going to do very much the same with their similarly retro-inspired S-Type. So the stage was set. The all-new non-compromised Rover 75 was ready for launch in 1998. And it all kind of went wrong from there, really. Bernd Peterschreider was becoming quite frustrated with Rover. He desperately wanted the brand to fit. They were very happy with the overall strategy that Rover was going to be the perfect contrast to BMW, but there were frustrations afoot. The strong pound meant that any British-made product was suddenly expensive to sell overseas, while BMW were also frustrated by the government's lacklustre response when the company asked for help to renovate the Longbridge facility. So he used the platform of the Birmingham Motor Show to not necessarily talk about the all-new 75 and instead bemoan the precarious state that Rover found itself in financially. Rover was now BMW's English patient. In hindsight, that speech was ill-judged. It hamstrung the car before it had even gone on sale. Despite that, the reaction from the press and the public was pretty good. The press praised the car for its superb ride comfort. It's actually very decent handling. Lineup of engines, spec of Classic, Club and Connoisseur with the SE bolt-on models. It seems to hit the ground running from that respect. This was clearly a car built with a purity of form, an engineering integrity that Rover hadn't seen for probably over 20 years. There might have been some that lamented the retro styling, but remember it was very much in vogue at the time. Jaguar's S-Type, the VW Beetle, the Fiat 500, the Chrysler PT Cruiser. But there will be some that would have hoped that a Rover was going to be more trailblazing, perhaps more akin to a P6 or an SD1 maybe. Despite that positive start to the Rover 75, BMW's patience had well and truly run out by the year 2000. Just 18 months after the car was initially unveiled, BMW sold Land Rover to Ford and sold Rover to the Phoenix Consortium. Part of that deal meant Rover 75 production had to move from Cowley in Oxford to Longbridge in Birmingham, a logistical feat in itself. But the Rover 75 was a good enough car to endure, and the Phoenix Consortium quickly went to work by putting the Estate project on sale, a car that was in development at the same time as the Saloon, but BMW never gave it the green light. And the Estate model is a very pretty car. The Phoenix Group also brought out MG badge derivatives of all the Rover models. So the Rover 75 also had the MG ZT, a much sportier interpretation of the 75. However, despite that newfound enthusiasm from the Phoenix Group and all those new models, profitability was still a challenge, and it was quite clear the company was in trouble. And come the facelift that was introduced in 2004, where a lot of the expensive bits were stripped out to try and improve the profitability, it was clear that the end was nigh. By spring 2005, MG Rover was no more, and the factory gates closed at Longbridge once and for all. There then followed a slightly undignified tug of war between two Chinese companies, the Shanghai Automotive Group and Nanjing, for the right to MG Rover. Ford had bought the Rover name, so Nanjing had to use the name Roe for its Roe 750, effectively a stretched version of the 75, and Nanjing went ahead with its MG7, effectively a rebadged 75. But it was indeed the end of the road for Rover as we know it. A real shame, because the 75 was a great car. And what's it like to drive today? Well, we're driving the 2-litre turbo diesel, and safe to say in 5-speed auto, guys, it's no ball of fire. In fact, it's pretty sluggish, but you can't argue with it. It's absolutely peerless in terms of its ride comfort. It's superb, and that ride and handling combination is actually really well balanced. The handling's really decent, the steering is well weighted, the brakes are good. All of the controls just feel good, well engineered. The interior is a triumph. I love this curvaceous face shear. It makes a real good blend of materials. The gauges in front of me just look classically elegant. They don't look out of place. They look very befitting of a luxury car. The top versions had pipe leather seats as well, and they just look like a mini Rolls Royce. It's just superb. But the Rover 75 is emerging as a very credible modern classic, and at a sensible price. And in Estate, guys, it's highly practical too. Not everyone will get on board with the retro styling, but you can see the engineering purity with this car. So it's a pity it was also the company's swan song, really. But if you're in the market for a dependable and excellent value modern classic, you really should consider the Rover 75. You won't regret it.
This video is proudly sponsored by Lancaster Insurance. Give them a call on 01480 400 889 for an insurance quote on your classic car. And don't forget to click the link below to enter their latest competition.